Welcome to Diplomacy Podcast. And today I am going to talk about the China's transformation and the economics of sharks. On the surface, they couldn't be more different. One about the rise of a global power and the other about a Hollywood film. But underneath both, there are questions of scale, symbolism, and how societies adapt to risk. So, over the next 30 minutes, I'll unpack what I mean by that, drawing on history, economics, and culture, and giving you concrete examples to think about. Let's start with China. For decades, headlines have used the phrase the rise of China. But I think that phrase understates what's really happening. We are living through the largest economic transformation in human history, and it's unfolding in our own lifetimes. What strikes me most is not just growth, but scale. Think about it this way: China's population is roughly equal to North America, South America, and all of Western Europe combined. When we say 1 million new graduates enter the Chinese labor market, that's like imagining the entire Ivy League class multiplied by dozens, competing in a labor market the size of multiple continents. Take cities as another example. Europe has maybe two or three metropolitan areas with more than 10 million inhabitants. The United States has perhaps two. China has 18. In total, there are 160 Chinese cities with populations over 1 million. Chengdu alone, sometimes called the gay capital of China, has 20 million residents, a vibrant bookstore scene, and a liberal cultural feel that is miles away from the political tightness of Beijing. Imagine discovering a city with the population of the Netherlands, and yet for many Westerners, it barely registers as more than a dot on the map. That's the scale we're dealing with. Scale also plays out in material production. China poured more concrete in 3 years of the 2000s than the United States poured during the entire 20th century. Its electricity system today is double the size of the United States. Its steel output is more than the rest of the world combined. These aren't small margins, they are multiples. And yet, the Western debate often reduces China to a GDP ranking game. Is it bigger than the US in dollar terms or not? That misses the deeper reality. When you produce more than half of the world's steel, or when over 1 billion people share a common written language, you're not just another data point in global modernity. You are a master key for understanding how modernity itself works. That phrase, master key, is one Chinese leaders themselves use. Deng Xiaoping once said, development is the hard truth. Xi Jinping has taken that further, repeating the slogan that development holds the master key to solving all problems. What do they mean by that? In one sense, it's Marxian. Progress is defined by material development, by infrastructure, by electrification. In another sense, it's political. It rebuts Western emphasis on human rights by saying, look, first we build roads, schools, and power grids. That's our definition of progress. And in a third sense, it's internal. It's a lesson drawn from the Cultural Revolution, when chaos and ideology nearly destroyed the country's social fabric. For the Communist Party, the way to avoid another cultural revolution is to anchor legitimacy in material development, not radical politics. But there is a paradox here. If material development is everything, where do ideas, morality, and culture fit in? Critics inside China point to the bulldozing of historic neighborhoods in Beijing or the erasure of local traditions in the pursuit of GDP targets. They argue that a society cannot just chase growth, it must also preserve meaning. And in an ironic twist, Xi Jinping's government itself has swung conservative, encouraging families to have more children, valorizing tradition, and reviving Confucian ethics, even as it pushes into high tech modernity. It's as if the country is trying to reconcile the Cultural Revolution's destruction of tradition with a new era of selective revival. So, how do we make sense of all this? One way is to contrast China's scale with Western histories of modernity. In Europe, modernization was piecemeal, city by city, over centuries. In China, it has happened in 3 decades, often driven by top down decisions. That's why today you can walk through apartment blocks housing hundreds of millions of people, all built after the 1990s. More than 90% of Chinese households live in homes less than 30 years old. Imagine the entire housing stock of France, Germany, and Britain rebuilt in a single generation. That is what China has done. And yet, the real estate boom that drove this is now over, deliberately stopped by the government in 2020. The question now is whether China can invent a new growth model at the frontier of green technology, robotics, and AI, or whether it stalls in middle income limbo. Let me pause here and pivot to something that might seem unrelated: sharks. Why? Because sometimes culture and metaphor tell us as much about capitalism as raw numbers do. Take the movie Jaws, which just turned 50 years old. On one level, it's a thriller about a killer shark. On another, it's a story about risk, denial, and economics. Remember the mayor of Amity Island, who refuses to close the beaches despite evidence of a shark attack? His logic was simple: tourism drives the town's economy. Shutting down would destroy livelihoods. In rational choice terms, he was weighing probabilities, choosing to keep the economy open, even at the cost of safety. Sound familiar? During COVID 19, Boris Johnson in the UK was accused of playing the same game, prioritizing the economy over lockdowns, and journalists even dug up an old speech where he joked that the mayor of Jaws was the real hero. But Jaws is not just about local governance, it's about capitalism itself. Think about the shark as a metaphor: restless, insatiable, always moving. The English word shark began as dogfish centuries ago, but by the 1700s it already meant a swindler or speculator. By 1905, we had loan shark. Karl Marx himself described speculators on the Paris Stock Exchange as stock exchange sharks. The metaphor sticks because sharks, like capital, must keep moving to survive. They devour, they accumulate, and they rarely pause. And yet, the irony is that real shark attacks are vanishingly rare, fewer than 100 a year, half of them provoked by people trying to feed or touch the animals. Capitalism bites us daily, sharks not so much. Still, Jaws changed more than language. It changed Hollywood economics. Before 1975, studios released major films slowly, rolling them out city by city. Jaws pioneered the summer blockbuster, opening in 400 theaters simultaneously with massive TV promotion. It earned $470 million on a $9 million budget and invented the model of movie as marketing phenomenon: t-shirts, toys, sequels. That's capitalism in cultural form. Risk turned into spectacle, fear turned into consumption. And it lives on today in Shark Week television, shark tourism, and even entire industries selling shark deterrent devices, despite the statistical improbability of being bitten. Fear itself has become commodified. So, why put China and sharks in the same episode? Because both raise the same question: how do societies manage scale and risk? China shows us what happens when a billion people urbanize in a single generation. You get breathtaking growth, massive housing booms, and now the challenge of a controlled slowdown. Jaws shows us what happens when a community denies risk for economic gain. You get tragedy, then overreaction, then a $1 billion industry of safety devices. In both cases, the lesson is sequencing. Growth, whether of an economy or an industry, creates risks. If you don't govern those risks, the risks govern you. Let me end with this thought. When Xi Jinping says development is the master key, he is making a claim about history that material growth solves all problems. But Jaws reminds us that material growth can also create problems if left unchecked. A mayor who prioritizes short term income over long term safety is not a visionary, he is short sighted. And perhaps the same could be said of governments that ignore culture, ideas, or morality while chasing GDP. The real master key is balance between scale and sustainability, between growth and governance, between fear and rationality. I appreciate your comments and questions via email or in the comments section. Feel free to subscribe and see you next time.